Hey guys, thanks so much for tuning in for another edition of Let's Be Blunt with Montel, where we talk about everything, anything cannabis, and we also address some of the social issues that are plaguing us right now, especially going into this election year. So I'll be covering lots of other topics, but at the same time, every single day, I want to make sure that I can bring you some information every time we do a podcast that will help you navigate this space called cannabis a little bit better with more information. And it's a space out there right now, especially for those of you that are walking into dispensaries for the first time, or those of you who are, seeking out, some product and you don't know what you're looking for. I want to make sure we give you some extra information to help you, navigate the space a little bit better and make sure you don't run into some difficulty. And today we are so fortunate to have a guest who has literally been a mover, shaker, changer in the cannabis industry for the last 5 years.
Right.
She spent 20 years in the entertainment business as an actress, a casting director, and a producer. Then she was the founder of Women Above Ground, a networking organization for women of color in the cannabis industry. And she's the founder of NDICA, which is the National Diversity Inclusion Cannabis Alliance. She's a cannabis entrepreneur who co-founded the Glass Jar, an organic cannabis-infused herbal cream. She's the one and only Bonita Bomani. Thank you so much, Bo, for being here.
Absolutely. How are you, Montel?
I'm doing great, really. And thanks for being a participant in Let's Be Blunt. And that's what this is really all about, having a blunt conversation about the industry, where it's been, where it's going. And you're sitting on the cusp of both, where it's been and where it's going. Let's back up a little bit and give some people an introduction into really where you came from. So you spent 20 years in the entertainment industry. At one point in time, you were working for Dr. Dre. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, tell us a little bit about that.
So I developed his first feature film, which was called One Time, that he co-wrote with Dwight Patillo, and also the, what was his co-writer that wrote all the songs on the Chronic album? DOC.
Oh, okay, got it.
So that was our first film. And then I worked on their music videos as well for the Chronic.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Wow. So, should I know those? Come on with it. So, you were originally, but you're back in the OG of OGs.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And then what made you transition into the cannabis space?
Well, I was looking at Colorado, and I was watching the economic movement in Colorado, and I said, this is something I should look at, because, of course, being an entrepreneur, I knew this was something that I definitely had to be part of.
And let's also be aware of the fact that if it wasn't for the Chronic album, I think probably 80% of the people in America would not have changed their minds a little bit about cannabis.
Absolutely.
Then Dre should take some credit for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
I agree. Snoop, Dre, all of them.
Snoop, Dre, all of them. Yep, absolutely.
Absolutely. So looking at that, I started networking. I started going to conferences, going to meetups, looking at different influencers in the industry, so, just to see what was going on and what I really wanted to do, because I didn't know. I just didn't know how I wanted to enter in. But what I really noticed was that there were no people of color.
Right.
And that was a big issue. Mm-hmm. I'm watching this industry, and I'm watching, now folks that have been to prison for this plant now are being basically kept out. They're pushed out, kept out, left out.
Right.
And that just wasn't okay. So this is where I started Women Above Ground. Mm-hmm. And then I had to make it broader. That's when I started Indica, because what I was seeing with these social equity plans, there just wasn't, I would say, integrity around them. So I was watching all these predatory investors come in and really try to take advantage of these social equity applicants that, would have had an opportunity to be in the industry. And that, of course, that was black and brown people.
Right. And, it's really interesting. Even today, the industry has been growing. This is a 5-year burgeoning, that's longer than that, but in the last 5 years, the industry has really taken off, yet the number of black and brown people getting licenses hasn't changed. It's still less than 1%
Absolutely.
of the whole industry. Is that right?
Absolutely. And it's just, it really breaks my heart in the sense that, I thought LA would be the model for social equity, and, I've seen it turn into just a shit show, honestly. It's horrible.
Right.
In
what way? Go ahead, explain what do you mean?
We just went through our second phase of licensing for social equity applicants. Okay, so in the last, month and a half, they started issuing licensing, and it's all going to either Armenians or Russians or people other than the black and brown folks that, again, that have been targeted by the war on drugs.
Right.
And this is why social equity was created, the social equity plan.
Right.
So now we're watching what we thought was going to be a great opportunity for generational wealth for those communities turn into just an opportunity for investors, white investors, again.
Right.
So
Come in and buy a name.
absolutely. Absolutely. So
yeah.
they're using straw applicants, folks that really don't care about ownership,
Sure.
that will take $5,000 a month and then sell their license out in 3 years.
Right. Right. What do we got to do to turn this around, Bo?
Well, I think, Montel, we need your assistance. As an influencer, again, you're someone that can bring this to light. I don't think a lot of people even know that we have these social equity plans.
Right.
I mean, how many really know? I've had these,
Correct.
I mean, I know Snoop just spoke on it at the Revolt convention the other day. But my thing is that, again, if you know this, then why aren't you doing something about it?
Right.
Again, it's one thing to say, oh, yeah, I think that, minorities or people of color should have ownership. And it's another thing doing something about it.
Right.
Standing up and being that influencer. I fought long and hard, the last 4,
Absolutely.
I mean, you were right there with me. So
Been in this battle for 20 years. Yeah.
right, exactly.
Right.
So what do we do? I mean, when you see corruption like this, because again, there's no way that these licenses would have been issued to these folks, okay, that are these predatory investors, unless there were politicians or different, powers that be assisting them.
Sure. Absolutely.
I don't want to point fingers, but we know that's true.
Correct. But I mean, how do we get, and again, how do we change the sensibility of the community itself? I mean, there's a lot of African Americans who say that they want to be in the business, but then when it comes time to get in the business, either they want somebody to give them something, which means that they're willing to sell off a little piece of themselves for someone else's application. How do we get people to understand that this is a viable career path?
Well, what we've done here in LA is a lot of us that have diversity groups, so that are founders of diversity groups, we've really made our members really aware of what is really going on.
That's like Indica. That's
Yes,
what you're doing.
right,
Indica.
Indica, and then there's other groups like Latinos for Cannabis, CMA. So we've all come together so that we can basically be at those city hall meetings, be at the state capitol, because we have to start showing up. We have to start speaking up.
Right.
And I think there's been a lack of that. Black and brown people don't like to go to city hall.
Right.
But they have to. And that's where I'm going. Like, I just left Chicago, Detroit. My thing is to create awareness, because this is what the cities didn't do. They didn't allow any outreach. They didn't have a budget for outreach, but that's what they say.
Right.
But again, so there was no type of awareness put on the streets. So applicants that would actually qualify didn't even know that there was a social equity plan that existed.
Right.
So that's the first step, is creating that awareness and education around it. Then we need to really, again, start being at those meetings, start, talking to our councilmen, start talking to, the powers that be, our cannabis czar, whoever's in, who's ever in control of our licensing and social equity. We need to start standing up and saying, listen, we demand this, not please can we have. We have to start demanding this, because again, we deserve the right to be in the industry.
Correct, especially for the dues that have been paid along the way. And a lot of people don't understand is that since cannabis was made illegal, back in 1937, almost 80% plus, probably 85% of those people incarcerated in this nation for marijuana violations, cannabis violations, have been people of color.
Correct. And specifically black and brown, Latino, and African American.
Correct. And there's some people who would say, and liking it to, a enslavement program. Because, if you couldn't have slavery, and just put people in jail. It's
That's
the same
exactly it, modern day slavery.
Correct.
Absolutely. Because if they could jail us now, or enslave us now legally, they would.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, tell me a little bit more about Indica as an organization. When did you found it? When was it founded?
2017.
2017. Okay. And now where are you at? Are you have chapters in different states, or one chapter and people can reach out to the organization?
Well, yeah, I don't like the chapter thing, just because, again, you have to I just don't like to have to, I would say, micromanage. But again, that's what you have to do in order to keep the integrity of your organization, because I don't know what this chapter head may be doing over here. So, but I do have, I would say, people that are guiding Indica in different states that, like, Illinois and Michigan, because we need that, because they do have social equity programs, and I want to be able to assist in keeping them integral.
Right. Do you know which, maybe it would help right now, do you know which states that are out there right now that have a social equity program built into their legislation?
Illinois.
Okay, Illinois is one. Got
Then
it.
you have Michigan,
Michigan.
Massachusetts,
Maryland.
Maryland.
They added it, did they not? It started
Well,
off that way. It wasn't.
Right, because they
It
got
wasn't.
sued.
Correct.
Because not one black person got a license, not a
Correct.
person of color.
Same thing
so-
in Florida.
Absolutely.
Right.
But on round 2 of Maryland, which was supposed to be social equity, same thing happened again.
Right.
So, I mean, what are we really doing here?
Right.
And then also Georgia. I think Georgia's 20% of their licensing has to go to people of color.
Okay.
So
people in those states need to wake up a little bit. Can they reach out to you and get information about how they can actually participate in this, grain rush?
absolutely, they need to, because ultimately, if they don't start participating, at the city and state level, then again, they're going to miss that opportunity. Because I was just in Chicago, and there was several social equity meetings that were being held, but they were all being held by white groups.
Right.
And they were not giving the correct information. So there's a lot of misinformation being put out there as well, because they don't want, black and brown folks to really understand what this really is. And they think that, again, it's an opportunity that they're going to have to beg for, or they're going to have to cooperate with these folks,
Sure.
these investors, in order to get that opportunity. And they don't, because they have to understand that they control that license.
Right. And each state's, and I would venture to say that anybody tuning in right now, listening, and if you're interested at all in getting into this cannabis space, no matter who you are, but especially if you are a person of color and you're interested in, all you really have to do is download your state's legislation. Start there. Just start by downloading the bill or whatever it was that passed that allowed for legal cannabis in your state. When you look at that, the bill is going to include whether or not it has a social equity plan.
Absolutely. Google and start researching, and they need to start reading. And that's what, I'm finding that black folks aren't doing. They're not reading. And it's like, they need to. They need to stay aware of what's going on in their state and their cities. So, like Detroit.
And then, like Detroit, what's happening in Detroit right now?
Well, Michigan has a horrible social equity bill.
Right.
The only thing they're doing for folks that would actually qualify is giving them a 50% discount for application fees.
But there's no preference allowed.
No priority, because like in LA, we were supposed to have priority. So again, we had a 2-to-1 ratio. So for every one general license that was issued years ago, there has to be 2 now issued to social equity applicants. Okay. They don't really have that in Michigan, so there's no priority in any kind of way. So really, it doesn't matter if you're a social equity applicant, and then you get 50% off the application fee, which is what, $8,000. So you have to pay $4,000. First of all, most social equity applicants that would qualify have to be low income, have to come from a, I would say, marginalized community.
Right.
And have a cannabis conviction. With those type of requirements, who has $4,000
Right,
to
sitting
put
in
down
the bank.
non-refundable to
Right.
go on an application?
Right. So they end up selling off their portion to get the $4,000 for the application.
Correct. So now they become a black face to a license
Right.
or an application.
Right. With no back end.
Absolutely.
Right.
So these are the problems. So now I'm working with some representatives out of Michigan to put a new bill in, to basically author a new bill that we can introduce that would create a real social equity plan with some safeguards there.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit about, you founded a product called the Glass Jar. Is that a company or a product? Tell me about it.
That was the product. I
was
think
the
you
product.
had some. I gave you some a
Yes,
couple years ago.
A couple years ago.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So yes, it's a topical cream. And it really isn't, and I tell people this because a lot of people think it's the THC or CBD that is the effective ingredient. And it's really not. It's the terpenes
Right.
that really are effective.
In that, but yes, absolutely. Terpene. Well, we've been on this CBD kick in America now for 5 years, and as if that's the only component of this plant that's of any value, and finally science is starting to be read, science that was already there, science that was already available when people got the misunderstanding that the only thing valuable to the plant was CBD. But, all the other cannabinoids, the terpenes, the fats, the lipids, all of those play in together with the effect that you get from this plant.
Absolutely.
And a lot
Full
of people,
spectrum.
Full spectrum. A lot of people don't know. But, I think as we move forward and as science is catching up, this most recent Sanjay Gupta special, I don't know, a lot of people saw that, didn't wait till the last 5 minutes of that last special as number 5, where he literally backtracked and said, I didn't mean to give the impression that CBD was the only thing that worked. As a matter of fact, THC works. So we know that. And this isn't something that he needed to even report. We've known that for 30 years.
Right.
Right? The science is there. And again, that's where, part of the whole educational process is what we've been trying to do here with Let's Be Blunt, is to make sure people understand that, you said it earlier, Google, well, don't just Google the legislation in your state, Google cannabis.
That's right.
It
Absolutely.
behooves you to educate yourself about the plant and educate yourself about the entire history of the plant, and then you would understand why we are sitting in the situation we are right now.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's so key because I see a whole demographics out there that don't understand what cannabis really is.
Right.
They're still resisting it. They're still resisting legalization, and it's just, and it's crazy to me because, again, economically, a lot of these cities, like in Baltimore, I did a radio show there, and they just called, it was Rick and I that did the show, and they were saying we were legal drug dealers, we're ruining their communities. They just didn't get it. And they could really use the economic part of what's going on with cannabis in their city because, again, they're an oppressed city.
Well, you know what I mean? When you're talking about Baltimore, that's my hometown, but you're also talking about Maryland. Maryland has, green pastures. Maryland is a place that, down along the Eastern Shore and other places where hemp could grow in the 1,000-acre
Right.
areas. And in using hemp, we don't even understand. We're barely scratching the surface of what the hemp fiber and hemp can do. You look at a city like Baltimore that's trying to regentrify some of the areas that have been just so devastated by blight, where, there's the, Park Heights area and some other areas where the buildings are falling apart. Hemp fiber can be used for bricks, folks. You know what I mean? So
that's right.
there's not just one use for the cannabis plant. This thing can be used and has multiple vertical opportunities for business.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
Even if you didn't want to be in the business of selling medicinal or recreational cannabis, you could be in the business of selling the hemp fiber for a myriad of things.
That's right. Absolutely. I mean, and just the ancillary parts of cannabis is so lucrative. I mean, if you look at, I think one of the most lucrative sectors right now is the cannabis tech companies.
Right.
This is what I always tell people. Anything that is needed in mainstream is needed in the cannabis industry now.
Correct.
So whether it's HR, whether it's PR, whether it's marketing, whether it's, anything. I mean, it's, they can just transfer their skills.
Right. Well, I think one of the biggest issues that's really facing this industry right now is the fact that, everybody jumped in and tried their best to, stake out their little fiefdom for their own independent economic growth. They forgot to educate the masses along the way. So education is, I think, the biggest downfall to cannabis. There are people out there who still don't even understand why cannabis.
Exactly.
Why would I choose, cannabis over a Vicodin? Why would I choose cannabis over a beer?
Exactly. Absolutely.
And it behooves this industry to be the educator, not
That's right.
to shirk our responsibility and not try to. I mean, you think
Absolutely.
we're missing out on, I read some data recently that blew my mind that, now that things are starting to settle out, when you start taking a hard look at the demographic that's doing the most buying in this country, it's not who people think. Even in recreational markets where you think it's the teenage stoner that's running out and buying, something, it's not. It's the baby booming senior citizen who's buying the most cannabis because they now recognize the value of cannabis in their life. And so why we aren't attempting to educate that demographic, it just blows my mind.
Exactly. And you know what? You're so right because I was just having this conversation with Dr. Uma earlier, and with the senior market, it's once they try a product and it works, they're your most loyal customer.
How about they have the most disposable income of anybody in America today? It's not-
Exactly.
you know, and it's really been funny, the fact that, you know, it used to be, 10 years ago, 10, 20 years ago, most people were living to see what they could leave to their children. Now, most people living are spending on themselves and telling their children, get a grip. You know what I mean? You know,
Right.
you know, where the day of the inheritance is kind of going by the wayside.
That's right.
Because now we're recognizing that, you know, it costs a little bit more to live out the length of our lives right now.
People are living longer too.
Correct. People are living longer. And, you know, that adult who worked their tail off to earn that retirement is, you know, not being selfish, but being responsible to themselves.
And they should.
Correct.
They should enjoy their money.
Correct.
I've always told my mother that. Don't wait. We're not waiting for you to die to
Correct.
get your money. Go enjoy your money.
Right. Use it on you, man. You
I
want to
agree.
earn it. You know what I mean?
That's right.
And so now they've got baby boomers and older who are going, you know, I got kidney problems, I got liver problems. Do I really need to hit that 2 glasses of wine when I come home? Maybe I could try this stuff that these guys have been talking about to get the same feeling of relaxation, to get the same ease in joint pain,
That's right.
to get the same, you know, everybody as we age are dealing with difficulties of aging. And, you know, some of that is just uncomfortableness.
That's right.
And, you know, whether we call uncomfortableness a medical issue or not depends on how uncomfortable you are. And, you know, I think if there's something that can ease that uncomfortableness for senior citizens that doesn't require something that's going to cause some latent, you know, addiction
Or side effect
or side effect,
Right.
why not?
or death.
Correct.
That's what's
Why not?
happening with the with the meds. So
That's right. That's right. And, you know, you look at countries like Israel that made, you know, cannabis a geriatric drug almost 15 years ago. You know, at age 70, you can walk into several hospitals down there in Israel and get your prescription filled just with your ID card, and your malady is 70. I turned 70. So go in and they will fill a prescription for you with cannabis,
right, as they should.
as they should.
I mean, I don't. You know, this is why America just drives me crazy.
I don't know. What do we got to do, though, Bo? I mean, you know, again, I am, you know, the biggest proponent of education. I think that's
Exactly.
as important as location is to real estate.
Right.
Education is as important when it comes to cannabis. But,
Absolutely.
you know, how do we crack this nut?
Well, I mean, this is what Indica's focused on. You know, now is just educating, because this is, again, the biggest problem that we've seen the last couple of years with our social equity programs. Again, is the fact that there's no outreach, there's no education. And again, in LA, that was written into our ordinances. So actually that's law. So our city's breaking the law by not providing the outreach, the education, the technical assistance, things that were promised for social equity applicants before they even rolled out the application process. Okay, so this is the thing we're fighting right now. That's why there's been a lot of media around it the last week, because we've been really pushing back on what the city's trying to do.
Right.
And so again,
And you said to make sure you know, tell people what the city just did. You said that when they were issuing a new set of licenses, they didn't issue them in compliance with the social equity part.
absolutely. So they're going to, you know, other ethnic groups, specifically Armenians and Russians and, you know, other folks that I don't know how they were qualified as social equity applicants. Because first of all, the war on drugs,
It was never fought against them.
their communities were never targeted.
Correct.
Tell me when they were targeted, because I don't even remember Armenians being in our city in the 80s.
Right.
You know what I mean? So these are the issues that I'm having that the city seems to want to, you know, basically turn a blind eye to, and that's not okay. So we're in City Hall every week, you know, and we're making our folks speak up. We're bringing 200-300, you know, black and brown folks, so that the city understands that we're aware and we're paying attention.
And this is not some anti-Armenian or anti-Russian campaign. This is just a campaign to support the legislation that's already in place.
Correct. The social equity plan is not even about race. It's not about color. It's
Right.
not about ethnicity. It was never built on that. Again, it was built on a study that looked at the arrest rates.
Right.
And that's all it was built on. So if we look at that, it was all black and brown folks that were arrested and that were targeted. So based on that, again, it's not about being racist or anything like that. You know, it's not that I dislike Armenians. No, it's just the fact that they bought their way in. And I'm just keeping it very real, period. And it's not okay because whoever's working with them, okay, and the feds are in our city, and they've been in our city investigating all this for the last 7 months. And I'm with that because whoever is playing this game with them needs to they all need to be indicted as far as I'm concerned.
Right.
This is not okay to sell our people out.
Right.
And I know black folks that are selling black folks.
Correct.
You know, so all this needs to stop. And again, but it's not unless, again, we educate and we expose all this.
Right.
You know, and this is why, you know, we work so hard to do this. And NDICA became the first cannabis organization that was funded by the governor of the state of California.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Which was a big deal because there's never been a government entity that's funded any type of cannabis organization.
Right. And do they still fund now? Are you still on the funding list from the state now? That's incredible. That really is.
And it's based on our Prop 64 bill. Thank you. So it's a part of the tax money that's allocated to groups that are doing work for basically those folks that were affected by the war on drugs.
Wow. And so right now, if somebody wanted to reach out to get information from you, where did they go?
They would go to let me spell it, THENDICA.org. So the Indica, because people like to put I in front of Indica, but it's no I. So it's
just an N.
THENDICA.org. Yes.
Okay.
And reach out to us because, again, our services are free. So we're not charging, you know, let me tell you what we do because this is great. We instead of an incubator, I like to call it an ecobator because it's basically a whole ecosystem. And so we have vocational training, we have internships, mentorship, cannabis training, business education, cannabis education. We also have job placement. We do 3 expungement clinics a month.
Wow.
So we're helping, and those are
People
all free.
expunge their records. And this is something that's really important. Again, when you say read, educate, people need to understand that there's an organization out here that will help you expunge your record.
For free.
For free. Do we say for free?
For free.
For free. Holy moly. Go ahead. Yeah.
For free. Because again, there's 4,800 barriers to a conviction, you know, from housing to education to employment to even a vocational license. You know, you can't even get a barber's license with the felony.
That's insane. And a felony that is based on something as ridiculous as cannabis.
Exactly. And well, we still got folks sitting in prison. I mean, you know, this is something you and I have been talking about for years. It's like, why are people still sitting in prison when you got guys like John Boehner that are sitting on the board of one of the largest cannabis companies that voted against decriminalization?
Correct. Yes.
So how is all that working? You know, this is just driving me, again, crazy.
It is insane, and especially, you know, a lot of people don't even understand John Boehner is actually now, just like, you know, when you look back at Harry Anslinger. Anslinger, you know, was the driving force to ensure for the criminalization of cannabis and hemp worldwide. But 10 years before that, he was a major proponent of cannabis use. A lot of people don't know that. Anslinger literally was one of the biggest prohibitionists that there was, and honestly lost his mind when prohibition was lifted. He had to have something. And so he then turned on the product that he had been talking about for 5 or 6 years, about the fact that marijuana some of his speeches were literally recommending that those people could get off of alcohol by using marijuana. And cannabis back then. He was, you know, that tacit kind of a proponent for cannabis. It wasn't until prohibition was lifted that he then said, something's got to be illegal. So, you know, we got to figure out some way to put them darkies in jail. This way, and remember, he's the guy who made the statement of, you know, cannabis makes a black man want to step on a white man's shadow.
Right.
Yeah.
Or Mexicans rape women.
And and white women want to have sex with Mexicans and...
and black
but
folks.
he didn't use those terms.
Right.
He used the other words, but yeah, you know, we don't have to go there. But so people need to understand that, you know, the history, and that's where we go back again to educating yourself.
Correct.
You know, from the beginning. It's not like I want to jump into the green rush. If you want to get into the cannabis space as a possible career path, why not learn everything you need to know?
Correct. And even if it's not the career path, it's just, again, when we talk about social equity, it's not just around cannabis. It's around any industry,
Right.
period. And so people just need to understand, I talk to a lot of reverends about this because they're like, well, we can't endorse cannabis. So I'm not asking you to endorse cannabis. I'm asking you to stand up for social equity.
And, I really honestly don't, you got to understand, I think, where the entire religious movement in the black community comes from when it comes to cannabis. I don't believe that it came from the idea of an illicit drug. It came from the fact that the clergy saw young black men being targeted and tried their best to do the same thing, vilify what they thought was the target of the targeting.
You're
But they
absolutely
missed it.
right.
But they missed it. It wasn't the cannabis, it was the color of the skin. That was the target. It could have been, drinking water.
That's right.
While black. I mean, you take a look at it right now, just being in your home, living in your own home while black can get you killed.
Absolutely. And what you just said is it hits home because I have these conversations with community leaders, not just reverends, but just people in the community that are so afraid. It's like having PTSD because of their communities, because their communities were so hard hit and targeted by the war on drugs.
Right.
They are afraid of that. They're afraid to see their sons and their husbands and their brothers go to prison again.
Right.
You know what I mean? So you're absolutely right. So this is, again, how do we really deal with that? Education, okay, we say education, I get that. But even to get them to come, to a meetup is difficult.
I guess go back 20 years and, most of the meetups took place from the pulpit. So, if we end up having to go to the churches themselves. And, I can remember a day back when I was speaking around the country, this was like, 20 years ago, 88, 89, I probably spoke in about 10, historically black churches from the pulpit on Sunday morning. Got an opportunity for the minister to step aside and instead of doing his sermon, introduce the speaker. And, whether or not maybe it was more respected because the reverence of the environment made people bigger listeners, but I was speaking across the country back then about things that back then I was speaking about staying away from drugs, staying in school, staying away from premarital sex and dropping out and drugging out and sexing out. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's what I was talking about. And they let me speak in those churches in front of the congregation. Well, that's probably the only time that congregation would get together for any social issue. And so it's maybe time again for a couple of these reverends to reach out and get a little education.
Absolutely.
And once they get a little education, start thinking about bringing in organizations like yours into the church and put them in the pulpit. And I think we'll change the attitude, because again, I find it just ridiculously impossible. The number of conversations I've had with, a couple of African American reverends who won't believe the science,
right,
and can't believe the science because they've been told and it's been vilified so much and used as an excuse for the rest of their congregants that they just don't want to accept the new truth.
Yeah, and they're afraid. I mean, a lot of them will pull me to the side and say, well, Bo, I want to get in, but I could never let my congregation know that I'm pro-cannabis. I'm like, really?
Why?
Yeah, I'm like, really?
Yeah.
But again, I think that's a great idea. If we can get in those churches and really just speak to those, those folks and let them understand that this is an opportunity for them to change their communities. This is a huge opportunity.
But also talk about the fact that this is something that was systematically done and represented this way to send fear through a community the same way as burning crosses do.
Absolutely.
This was systematically planned out to make sure that, reverends would make the statement to their congregants, you can't do this, you can't touch this, you can't be a part of this. I think, again, enslavement happens in many ways. You can get chains or you can also be enslaved in the brain. And,
That's right.
And when you have community leaders unknowingly participating in false information, and even when the truth comes out, not be willing to accept the truth.
Right.
There's a certain level of enslavement in that.
Absolutely. But, you know, again, they won't even do the research.
Right.
You know, I had an argument with my uncle about this like for hours because he did not want to even do the research.
Right. And accept not an alternative truth, but the truth.
The truth.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's next for Bomani? Come on now. What's next?
Well, a lot of things. We're building out our incubator in South LA. And so that folks will be able to come and be able to learn cultivation, manufacturing. They'll able to get that education that they need and kind of use it as a hub to basically understand what it is to be in the cannabis industry and how to get in, even if they don't want to be owners, you know, just even work, you know, in the industry and just to educate themselves. And then I'm also putting incubators across the nation.
Okay.
So Chicago's going to be next. And then also we are launching a brand called Prolit Ventures.
Okay.
And that's a celebrity branding and marketing company for celebrity brands only.
Okay. Got it.
So, yeah.
Excellent. You have a distribution arm too with that?
Yes, we do.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
we have distribution.
You know, and hopefully in the next, 2 to 4 years, I think, we'll know in 2 years, but I think there's going to be a major change in legislation. You can't have 34 states and the District of Columbia with cannabis laws and not do something major. The cat's out the bag. You're not putting it back in.
Right. So you think federally?
I think federally there's going to be something that's going to come down the pike that might be, revolutionary for the entire industry.
Well, they're still going to, but because of Anslinger, they're going to have to undo that the
correct.
international pacts that they have that made
it
so
was
that would have to be done first,
A
right?
1963 treaty signed by almost every nation literally banned hemp worldwide. But in the last 10 years, there's been close to 20 countries who have pulled out of that treaty. And that's going to continue to happen. So, and the only reason why the treaty exists is because of us, the United States. So the second the United States gets to a national, consistent law, which I think, what may end up happening is instead of a federal legalization, it may be a federal kick down to the states and then leaving it up for the states to determine. And then we'll probably for the next 10 years be riding around in an area where 48 states have cannabis laws and 2 don't. And then in about 10 years, I think someone's going to say this is about as ignorant as it gets. Same reason why, we didn't have same-sex marriage across the country, or the same reason why we have some of the laws that now we finally do have, again, a national speed limit law, right? I mean, there was a while where every state had independent right to set the speed limit. Now we finally come back and recognize, you know what? Do you have to drive more than 55? Come on, man. So when 48 states say it's okay to have cannabis, the other 2 will probably end up being just grandfathered in under a national law. So
Correct.
I think we're going to see something where it may become a states' rights law change first, and then from that, I think we move forward.
Right. And then with that, we have to ensure again that there's something across the board for
Correct.
social equity.
Correct.
Again, we have to allow our people to get involved.
Right.
They have, we got to take down the barriers because, a big barrier was always financial.
Right.
And so the minute they tried to take that down, then they created other barriers, to entry.
Yes.
So again, that's why I think across the board, like these regulations and these bills should be pretty uniform.
Right. That's going to be the biggest trouble right now because you've got every single state has a different law and every municipality within the state has a different law.
Right.
So by the time, you try to package a product, in some states like California, you've got 20 packages for the exact same product.
Exactly.
With different, writing on the outside of the package. And you have to meet that requirement. You can't sell in that particular municipality.
Exactly.
And then, you go from one state to the next state, and now it's a whole different set of laws.
Right. Even distribution.
Yes.
Washington, you can bring the cannabis, the cultivator can bring the cannabis right to the dispensary.
Right.
Where here, no way. It has to go to the distributor.
Distributor
It has to do testing, and then the testing, then they have to decide, okay, throw away the product, no, yes.
Right.
And then that has to go, how it goes to retail. But
it's insane.
So, again, we need those type of regulations to be a little bit more uniform. But what I'm doing is I'm working with the different lawmakers to adopt what I would
A
say.
standardized
Right.
legislation.
Yeah, so even though their bill may not be up to par, we can take it there,
Right.
by reintroducing the right bill.
Right.
So Illinois right now has probably the best social equity bill that I've ever seen. So I would say adopt that and then take it across, to each
Around the
state.
country. Sure. Well, I wish you luck, Bo, and I'm telling you, anything we can do to help you out here, and if you want to come back talking about a specific area of the country, we can sit down and talk about that to make sure that we wake some people up in their living rooms and to make them understand that there's an opportunity there for them also. So anytime you want to do that, let me know.
Of course.
And you've got to know that you can tune in and catch us in the next episode of Let's Be Blunt with Montel. And I can't thank you enough for tuning in today. Tune in again.